I logged the squall before our elders did, and that is the only reason I am the one telling this. We were Ashendrel, what is left of us, 11 drift ships running low water and lower fuel along the cradle margin, the frozen buffer band every chart maker leaves blank where it meets human space. My captain sent our scout, the Halsven, ahead of the convoy to scavenge ice from the margin's dead shelves, because the elders say the band itself is safe, so long as you never cross the second line. We had reason to trust the rule. 6 convoys ahead of ours had run this same dead band since our homeworld came apart, and each had logged the same instruction passed mouth to mouth, because the drift owns no archives anymore, only memory. Stay short of the second line and the margin is only cold. Cross it and you are someone else's problem, assuming there is enough of you left afterward to be a problem at all. I had grown up on that rule the way I had grown up on rationed water, something you did not question, because questioning it had never once kept anyone fed. We did not cross it, the margin crossed us. A squall came off the boundary, not weather, nothing our instruments had a name for, and it took our rudder off the hull cleanly and put us down hard on a frozen shelf 8 hours short of any course a sane navigator would plot. I cut the engines before they could finish dying on their own. Hessar, my pilot, did not speak for a long while after we stopped sliding, and when he finally did, it was only to ask how far short of the second line we'd actually landed, as if the answer might still be something we could walk back from. Tamrin, our engineer, was already pulling up the damage manifest, and his face told me what the numbers would say before he read them aloud. We were going to die on that shelf, slowly, the ordinary way refugees die, of a small thing nobody fixed in time, in a cold that does not announce itself as an enemy so much as a patient and very thorough accountant. It was Hessar who found the shelter, half buried in pack ice, built from a hull section that had not come from any vessel we recognized, with a chimney pipe still breathing a thread of heat into the dark. We knocked because the alternative was to freeze deciding whether to knock. The man who opened the hatch was old in the way only isolation ages a person, not in years alone, though there were plenty of those in him, but in the particular stillness of someone who has stopped expecting to be asked anything. He gave his name as Coro Vase, last of a Tesuvine charter crew whose captain had ignored the second line 11 years before mine ever existed. He did not say what had happened to the rest of his crew. I did not ask twice. He had parts, a scuttled ship a half-day's walk from his shelter, stripped down to what he needed and left for what he didn't, and among the leavings, by his account, was a rudder coupling close enough to ours that it might hold the Halsven together as far as the convoy. He named his price plainly. Our fuel cells, all of them, more than we could spare and still reach home. I told him we'd starve the convoy to ration his ask. He told me that was the price of being alive in the margin, and that he had not made the rules. There was no cruelty in how he said it. That was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. It meant he had run this exact negotiation in his head so many times alone that the words had worn smooth, like stones turned over by the same hand for 11 years until they no longer cut anyone, including him. We argued the price the way 2 starving crews argue anything, in small circles, neither of us able to afford the larger one. I offered half the cells and our remaining medical stores. He countered with a number that left us bare. Hessar, behind me, had gone very still in the way he does before he says something he knows will not help. I would have argued longer still if Tamrin had not gone quiet at the shelter's far wall, where a row of supply crates sat stacked with a neatness that did not match the rest of the place. A neatness, I understood later, that belonged to someone keeping the only orderly thing left to him in good order, because everything else about his life had stopped being orderly a decade ago. He asked Coro where they'd come from. Coro said nothing for long enough that I understood the silence was the answer working itself loose. They had simply appeared, he told us, always at the edge of the shelf nearest the second line, never closer, never announced. The first had come in his 3rd month, when his old heater finally failed in a cold that should have killed him within the night, and by morning there was a crate at the boundary marker, sized for the exact coil his heater needed, no larger, no smaller. The second came when his filtration cracked and the water turned bitter with shelf salt. The crate held the precise membrane his system used, a part his own people no longer manufactured. The third, when he'd gone 3 weeks without enough food to keep working and had started making the kind of mistakes that get a man killed slowly. And the crate that time held rations measured, he swore to me, almost to the gram of what his body was short. No ship was ever sighted delivering them. No signal preceded or followed. Coro had stopped trying to thank whatever left them, because there was never anyone there to thank, and he had stopped trying to ask why, because 11 years had taught him the question would not be answered in any language he'd recognize as an answer. I want to be honest about what frightened me, because it was not the idea that something inhuman walks among the wreckage of dead crews. It was the precision. Every other piece of folklore I had grown up on, the ones our elders pass mouth to mouth because the drift owns no archives anymore, only memory was built on absence. The map that goes blank. The fleets that simply stop transmitting. Silence is a shape the mind can hold without breaking, but this was the opposite of silence. Something on the far side of an uncrossable line had been watching one stranded man closely enough, for 11 years, to know the exact dosage his failing body required before he had finished failing. That is not folklore. That is attention. And nothing in any warning I had ever been told prepared me for a version of human space that paid that kind of attention to a stranger it owed nothing. We fixed the housefin with Coro's coupling and what daylight we had left. When I offered him passage out, a real seat among real people, an end to 11 years of talking to nobody, he said no, and I believed him when he said it without bitterness. He told me that leaving would mean abandoning the only proof he had left that anything in this galaxy still noticed whether he lived. He had made peace with being the kind of man something unseen chooses, every time not to let die. He was not willing to trade that for the alternative, which was simply being forgotten by everyone else the ordinary way. We lifted at the gray hour before what passed for dawn on that shelf. Hessar saw it first, at the boundary marker, exactly where Coro's crates had always appeared. A single new crate, sitting in the frost, addressed to no one because there was no one to address it to. Inside were the parts for the failure we hadn't found yet. Tamarin caught it 3 hours later, deep in the housefin's secondary coolant line, a stress fracture from the squall that hadn't shown on any instrument we owned, that would have killed all 3 of us somewhere past the point of rescue. The crate held the exact seal, the exact gauge, packed as if someone on the other side of the margin had already run our diagnostics for us and known precisely what we would need before we knew to need it. We never broadcast that fault. We never broadcast anything at all. I have told this account once before, to the convoy elders, in full, the way I am telling it now. They wrote it down as a mercy granted, one ship, let go untouched, the way the old warnings say no ship is ever let go. They filed it beside the rest of what we carry instead of archives, and I have heard it repeated since at 3 different hearths, each time a little smoother, a little more like the story the drift wants to own. They did not write down the part that kept me from sleeping for a season afterward, which is that mercy was never the strange part. The strange part is that whatever decided to let us live had already counted, to the smallest measure, exactly how little we had left to spare, before we had finished running out of it. The convoy repeats the first part of this story freely, as proof the margin can be survived. They do not repeat the second part. I have noticed, when I tell it anyway, how quickly the room goes quiet, and how few of them ask me to say it twice. I have stopped trying to make them. Some warnings only mean anything to the person who is standing close enough to feel how exactly they were kept.